Greg and Ty were friends and welders in the metal fabrication industry. Both were recently hired to work at DEF Metalworks welding rail cars. Monday morning, December 3rd, began like many others at DEF.
I remember laughing with Greg first thing that morning about what he did over the weekend, the usual banter. And his first job was welding seams in a central car, and I was going to work outside the car welding some metal plates.
That's when things went wrong.
So about an hour goes by, so I go over to the rail car, I climb up to the entrance to check down on him. And that is when I saw him collapsed on the bottom of the car.
The closed rail car Greg was working in contained a ventilation system, but according to a company investigation, it was not yet turned on so it could properly exhaust the toxic, contaminated air away from the work area and replace it with fresh air.
And my first impulse was to get down there and try and help him, but somehow I had the presence of mind to call in an emergency on the radio instead.
The company's emergency response team arrived quickly and immediately sampled the atmosphere inside the rail car. They determined it contained high concentrations of carbon monoxide, which is lethal. After putting on emergency rescue equipment, the response team retrieved Greg from the car and began resuscitation efforts as they rushed him to a local hospital. But the help came too late.
The thing about this is it just did not need to happen. It's completely preventable. And sometimes I blame myself for not making sure an attendant was looking at him and watching him and asking him if he had a permit and stuff, or making sure he wore a respirator. And then I think about what would have happened had I gone down there after him. This was just something completely avoidable, and it's so sad that it had to happen.
The investigation also later revealed that no air quality monitoring or communication was in place. Ty will never forget the tragic consequences that resulted that morning from working in a confined space without the required safety measures in place.
Overhead and gantry cranes are routinely used to lift loads weighing many tons during production at many industrial sites. They are so commonly used that their hazards are often forgotten. But by knowing the crane safety features that are in place and following the required safety practices for crane operation, you can reduce your chance of accidents and increase your safety. In this lesson, you will learn the safety devices that should be found on overhead and gantry cranes, how and when to inspect the equipment, what functions must be checked during pre-operation testing, how to properly rig a load, and how to safely lift and move loads. You will also learn other required safety practices for overhead crane operation.
Three line workers were assigned to do the following tasks. Install 1/0 UD triplex service on an overhead distribution pole. Install 2-inch riser shielding and makeup service in a connected meter base. Jim, Steve, and Paul went directly to work with no job briefing. They dug up the existing 3-inch shielding's base vent hood, unscrewed the riser pole's existing shielding, and installed the 1/0 service. The three employees continued working as if they were alone, without coordinating or keeping track of everyone's position. Jim reinstalled the hood and the first piece of riser shielding and started refilling the hole. Steve started reinstalling riser shielding from the ground up. Paul sat on the meter base wall, 150 feet away, and started preparing terminations. 10 minutes later, while Steve was cutting the 1/0 service conductor to length near the UD switches, he lost control of the cable. The cable's loose end struck a middle cutout on the riser pole. Paul had a phase-to-ground contact of 14.4 kilovolts through his leather work gloves. He received severe burns to 50% of his body. How could everyone involved have prevented this tragedy? Beginning work without a job briefing was a serious error. The line workers' only focus was on completing their tasks quickly. Had the employee in charge spent just a few minutes presenting the job briefing that OSHA requires, these experienced workers could have avoided injury. Let's see how. Before putting on your fall protection harness, you need to first inspect it thoroughly. Pick up the harness by the D-ring in the back. Gently shake the harness to let the straps fall into place. Make sure the buckles are unfastened. Look for any damage, such as worn, frayed, or missing threads, cracked webbing, or foreign material on the harness. If you're not sure, don't wear it. Also, check the metal strap fasteners and D-ring to make sure they are not cracked or deformed. If your harness uses grommets, make sure they are firmly attached to the straps and are not deformed or otherwise damaged. Make sure buckle tongues are firmly attached and not bent. To put the harness on, slip it over your shoulders like a vest. Make sure the D-ring is in the middle of your back, directly between your shoulder blades. Pull each leg strap up and fasten the buckles together. Stand up straight and adjust the length of the side body straps as needed to make sure there is no slack. Then fasten the chest strap about mid-chest high. Adjust the chest strap as necessary to remove any slack. Make sure the shoulder straps and leg straps are snug while still allowing full range of motion. Eliminate any excess slack by tightening the straps in the buckle. Make sure the loose ends of the straps are tucked into the strap retainers. With your hand held flat, you should be able to fit your fingers underneath your leg straps, but not your fists.
Winter weather can be a lot of fun for everyone. Many look forward to snowy conditions and all the activities that go with it. But we often forget that cold conditions for long periods of time can be dangerous. Those who work in cold conditions should know that extreme cold weather needs to be taken seriously. An understanding of the conditions, signs, and symptoms of cold stresses is critical to safety. Underestimating the importance of this knowledge can lead to serious injuries. This course will prepare you to work safely in cold environments.
Yeah, you could say I've been in the trenches. I'm never going to forget that day installing concrete pipe with Charlie. I was operating a mobile crane. 12-foot trench had been dug a few days before. Charlie's standing over at the edge of the excavation, and he's helping me direct the placement of the pipes. So I'd picked up a section of pipe. I was about to swing it into place over the trench when Charlie noticed a pile of dirt that had fallen down from the trench wall. And that pile was big enough that it was going to block the proper alignment of the pipe. So, yeah, it's a problem, because we couldn't put down the pipe until this pile of dirt gets spread out. We're already behind schedule, so Charlie grabs a ladder and a shovel, and he climbs down into the trench. He's going to move the pile of dirt himself. I mean, he's climbing down before I even realized it and could react. He hadn't been down there long, and I see the trench wall simply cave right in on him. So I jump out of the crane, I call for help, and I see Charlie he's covered up to his neck in dirt. And by the time the response team could get to him and pull him out, he'd simply stopped breathing. He's taken by ambulance to the emergency room, but he couldn't be revived. And Charlie essentially was just trying to save some time. I mean, he knew our safety procedures required shoring before you work in a trench over 5 feet deep. But I gotta tell you, since that day, that it was really a horrible day, I've learned that being under that much dirt is like having the weight of a school bus on top of you. So if we had simply taken the time to install a trench box, this whole tragic incident could have been avoided.
A maintenance crew was preparing to reinstall a large pipe elbow over the opening at a reactor vessel at a Delaware oil refinery in November 2005. Workers had previously wrapped red tape around the steel bolts surrounding the reactor opening and covered it with plywood and plastic. They had also attached a danger, confined space, do not enter without permit sign. Nitrogen flowed into the reactor and exited from the covered opening. Nitrogen is invisible, but is colored light green here for illustration. However, there was no specific warning posted about the oxygen-deficient atmosphere caused by the nitrogen. After workers removed the plywood cover, a roll of duct tape, lying 5 feet down inside the reactor, was discovered. The crew knew they would not be allowed to reinstall the elbow until the tape was removed. They also knew that entering the reactor to remove the tape would require a specially trained and equipped crew and a confined space entry permit, which would take many hours. To avoid the long delay, one worker stood near the opening with a long, flexible wire and made several unsuccessful attempts to hook the tape. Investigators believe that the worker either lowered himself into the reactor to quickly grab the tape, relying on his foreman to insert a ladder so he could climb back out, or leaned over the opening and accidentally slipped into the reactor, or breathed in the oxygen-deficient atmosphere just above the opening. In either scenario, the inhalation of the nearly pure nitrogen caused the worker to quickly lose consciousness and collapse. The foreman and contract administrator saw the stricken worker lying unconscious inside the reactor. The tragedy escalated when the foreman inserted the ladder into the reactor and climbed down without a respirator to rescue his coworker. He, too, collapsed from the lack of oxygen. The contract administrator then declared an emergency on his radio. Emergency responders wearing supplied air-breathing equipment entered the reactor a short time later and removed the 2 men using a hoist, but attempts to revive them were unsuccessful. The atmosphere on a handheld meter showed less than 1% oxygen, a lethal atmosphere. An oxygen-deficient atmosphere is just one serious hazard posed by confined spaces. Like the men in this actual incident, you may be tempted to think you can quickly get in and out of a confined space to accomplish a simple task, but that misconception could prove fatal. Never enter a confined